Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Coach and Benway podcast. I'm Coach Red Pill, and as always, joined by Dr. Benway. And we are here going to be discussing something a little bit, not that contingent, but something that's interesting to both of us, which is the notion of diaries and journals. Because like in my own case, and I don't know about you, Doctor, but it's sort of like I always start writing diaries. I sort of like get into my head like New Year's resolutions, like this year, I'm going to do a diary. I'm going to do a detailed diary. I'm going to, write down all the little things I did every day and, just be very diligent about it. And then that sort of like lasts a few weeks and then it sort of like peters off. I don't know about you.
Well, I'll tell you, I have a lot of conflicting opinions on this. On the one hand, from the sheer act of, do I myself keep a diary? Directly no, in part because I generally don't focus on, what was I feeling at this point in time? Do I want to document that? But at the same time, I actually keep all of my notebooks from work and from just personal things I do, be it either stuff like for this podcast or for notes I take in like to-do lists or even like little scraps of ideas and stories I have. I never throw that stuff out. Even I just keep them and they stack up and I kind of document when, the time period, roughly speaking, that they were. So I guess I'm keeping a journal or a diary of things, but it's not, oh, dear diary, who was a bit of a pill today, da, da, da. The other funny thing is I actually like reading diaries quite a lot, but I don't mean like, oh, you steal your sister's diary and you're like, oh, what is she saying about me? No, I mean more like the great literary diaries that come to mind. There are many. And I have quite a few of them. I have the complete like Samuel Pepys diary, and Andre Gide's diary, Witold Gombrowicz. These are well-known artifacts that I just like reading at the very least because it's a nice record of things happening in real time that are frankly unplanned of the author. So I'm interested to see whether or not you think your life is worth documenting and whether or not there's going to be product out of it.
Well, okay, I think that there are different kinds of diaries or journals. Let's just let's make a quick distinction. A diary would basically be just the stuff that happens on the daily basis. Like, for instance, William Gladstone's diaries. If you ever read them, he was very diligent about it. And he kept a diary all of his life. But his diaries were very basic. It was like, I met with these people, this happened, I heard this, that. It was just very, very basic. No fifis, no insights as to whatever was going on in his life. It was just very like the basic details, the meetings that happened and all the rest of it. Whereas the journals would be something like Pepe's. How do you pronounce his name? Peps or
Pepys.
Peeps. Okay,
Pepys.
I've never known, to tell you the truth. And and a Nin and what have you. That's more like kind of like a literary work product. I always think to myself that especially good writers who write them, they're basically writing for an audience. Who's that audience? You see what I'm saying? Because a diary, if it's just the basic details of what you do, like the stuff that you write down on a daily planner, that's for you. But a journal where it's correct sentence structure and everything's tidy and your paragraphs flow, you're writing that for an audience. You're not writing it for yourself. So who's the audience? You see what I'm saying?
Well, it depends on who you're kind of dealing with. Some of these guys had an ambiguous attitude toward their diaries. Like I think Pepys either wrote his works, it wasn't just shorthand. It was like in a coded kind of ways, so that it was meant ultimately to be consumed. He wrote it to be consumed, but he didn't write it in such a way that anybody could, in and of their own accord, do something about it and publish it and try to fuck him with it. So, that's clearly, thinking out of both ends of his brain at that one. Guys like Gombrowicz, who is a Polish expatriate, published them as he was writing them. And he, his diary very famously starts, because he always played this game of his egotistical nature. It's like the first entry in the diary is like, Saturday, me. Sunday, me. Monday, me. Tuesday, me. And then after a week of this, he then gets into the actual course of it. The idea that being is like, okay, you're entering my ridiculous ego-centric nature, and now you're going to get what you're going to get,
right?
Kind of attitude. So they know it. Some of these guys knowingly play with what
Yeah,
they're
but
doing.
that's totally playful. Okay, I mean, you can be insightful and yet still be completely playful. I mean, what you're I have not heard of this author, to tell you the truth, but that attitude, yeah, that's a game. I mean, if he's writing them and publishing at the same time, yeah, totally. But like, there are other people that you suspect were writing it for themselves, quote unquote, but with an eye on eventually being published and being read and admired for some reason. And you always get a sense of some of these people. I can't think of any offhand, and that you got the sense that they were sort of like virtue signaling for a crowd that was not yet there. You know
Oh,
what I
I
mean?
could tell you very clearly because I have it. If you ever read what's his face, Tony Benn's diaries, they're partly because he documented almost his entire political life.
Mm-hmm.
And there are times when I read that. I mean, I don't think he's being dishonest, but I know he's portraying himself for the workers' movement in Britain and all of that bullshit that he always did. You
Mm-hmm.
could get a sense of that, but I still like the fact that, okay, this is a document of how his brain was working over the course of 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
A guy, the other diary I like, it's funny how all British men seem to really love to be diarists because
Yeah.
I've got a ridiculously large number of them. The one I really like is Alan Clark, who was the son of Lord Clark, the guy who his big documentary Civilization was a big deal. Well, Alan Clark was a sort of mid-level uh, cabinet member during the end of Margaret Thatcher's reign,
Mm-hmm.
and his diary is very famous as like the day by day blow of her final days.
Mm.
And it's very interesting to read, and it comes across as certainly private in the sense that he'll just say whatever the fuck he wants to say, but he published it like literally like in the few years after she got kicked out, and he kind of resigned from the if not resigned from the parliament, I think he may have gotten voted out. I forget the details, but that's another interesting one.
Mm. But these, I myself do not read literary diaries. I mentioned the Gladstone ones because I remember in college I did like some paper on Gladstone, but I don't particularly care for diaries because I think that there's something. First of all, they don't have any shape because by definition you're knocking down days at a time, right? So you can't give any shape to the material. It's just happening to you. It's just a sequence of events without any kind of rhyme or reason. So architecturally, I've always been very architectural in the way I approach books, and so I don't see any architectural form in a diary, and so I'm not that particularly interested in it. On the one hand, on the other hand, uh, like I said, I think that the feeling that there's virtue signaling going on bothers me. That sense that he's writing and I'm looking over his shoulder, but he's perfectly aware that I'm looking over his shoulder. And so I've never, I myself have never read anybody's diaries, published diaries, of course, that didn't have that feeling, or at least that sense that I got. The only one was actually Gladstone's, because, like I said, his was really like just, just bare bone detail. He wasn't interested in putting across anything like in his thoughts, right? Now, in my own case, I noticed that I have gone through periods of writing journals whereby I write out, what I'm thinking about certain things or what have you. But they're sporadic and I get bored by them. And what happens to me often is that when I reread this shit, I'm deeply embarrassed. And I've wound up destroying a lot of that shit over the years because I just find it just sort of stupid, right? I do have notebooks of just like the stuff I was doing, and those I find more interesting because those I look back on them and I'm like, oh yeah, I'd forgotten I did that, or I'd forgotten that this person. I mean, there are lots of people in your life that you tend to forget, even though at moments of your life they're essential. But later you're like, who the hell was that? Oh, I hardly remember him, or whatever happened to him, or and sometimes you sort of like have like a fond memory of somebody, and it takes you a while to realize that you were actually enemies at the time. And sometimes you recall your enemies better than your friends, and your enemies, you recall them more fondly than your friends.
Well, I think when you're talking about your personal diaries, it's certainly I'm not thinking about them in terms of, I'm creating the great
No.
literary work here, but I think it's an exercise in memory it's a memory catalyst to a
Yeah.
certain extent. And
A de
when
memoir.
I look at these things, I tend to think, oh, that's kind of like what I was focused on. And then I kind of remember little bits and pieces of what was going on. And I'll remember, oh, I remember this project. It was a pain in the ass. This guy who was running it was a total dick. I can see all the 50,000 things he made me do.
Hmm.
What a waste of, what a waste of life that
Yeah.
project.
Yeah.
And that's the little bit that I think is worthwhile, and it's why I have perhaps in some instances tendencies towards the pack rat and these things. I think the thing I accumulate more than anything else is paper matter,
Right.
and I'm often shredding a lot of things, be they receipts, documents from the bank or whatever, and I'm
Hmm.
trying to get rid of those. But from time to time, I'll look at the old notebooks I'm keeping, and like, oh shit, that's what we were working on at that
Yeah.
point.
Yeah, because
And
documentation doesn't mean anything. Bank statements and shit like that. I mean, I look at stuff that happened this month, and I'm like, what the hell happened there? I don't even remember it. I mean, it's like, eh. It's the stuff that I actually wrote down that bring the act of writing sort of like does something. And I don't think that, typing on a computer or on a typewriter is exactly the same thing. It's when you write it out write it out loud, sorry. Well, it's sort of like that. Write it longhand is really like
Mhm.
saying it out loud as opposed to saying it to yourself. Because online you say all kinds of things, but when you write it longhand, then it becomes different. Then it has a certain weight. I don't know if that happens to you.
Yes, because there will be a couple of things outside of just writing that I will see that I'm doing. One, the way I space and group comments actually tends to mean something.
Hmm.
It's the visual layout, and I also notice that when I'm in the process of doodling
Hmm.
in the middle of it, I really get a visceral sense of what I was thinking. Either I was drawing a particular doodle of someone or something that was on my mind at the time, or I was just doing just odd doodling shapes, which I know I do when I get bored
Hmm.
with the conversation, or when even if I'm not bored
How
with the
many do you have
conversation, I'm
now?
doing it when I'm trying to think through something, and so I just get these abstract images that I'm drawing, and have done it several times on this podcast. So it's hard to reveal it to you.
Yeah, well,
But but yeah,
but well, that's the thing that we talk about this podcast that it has to be more of a tennis match than bowling lanes, right? A tennis matches you're like back and forth. A bowling lane is one guy's turn and then the other guy's turn. And I personally prefer the tennis match thing, and that's why I tend to interrupt you more. But also I tend to be long winded, and so and you're way too polite. And I know that in a lot of these times that I'm ranting, such as now, you're doodling, and it's like I want to know when were you doodling in this episode right now as we're speaking? Have you been doodling?
no, I have not been doodling in this
Have
episode, but
you
I have
now
been
or
looking at.
ever doodled?
Well, I've definitely
I feel
doodled
I
when
feel
you.
like I'm on the House Un-American Activities
Well,
Committee.
I've definitely doodled when you've been talking. No, but this time around, I've just been looking at my notes as I want to make sure that I hit all of the little details I want. You did say something earlier that I wanted to kind of touch back on. I know when you said, "Oh, I don't like reading necessarily published journals because they don't have structure to them." I fundamentally just don't care about that.
Hmm.
To me, at any different point of time in an entry, it could or could not be interesting. And I think you have license a lot with these journals to be a lot more free form with how you read them than you would in like a structured text, right? I mean, it's not like a novel where I have to know from A to Z everything that's going on, and accumulation of all of that informs everything else. With these journals, you can go back, forth, in and out, regardless of time sequence or whatnot. They're very good reference little documents like that, and you can consume them in whatever kind of path you want, which I always found very interesting, which is why I think they're great historical documents. Like I said, I'll go back to the Alan Clark journal. I just skipped straight to the time when Thatcher was getting the boot, and I wanted to see what was what was going on at that time. And I know historical events and dates, and I'll flip to those that I want to see kind of what's going on. To me, that's like a great interesting bit of why I read these, and I have like a huge selection of them. I don't know why I keep buying them, but they're very entertaining to me.
Well, that's really interesting because, like I was saying before, whenever I read back on the diaries where I actually write down what I was thinking at that time, I'm always deeply embarrassed. Yet at the same time, I recognize a certain evolution. And at the other hand, what I'm always struck by is the fact that I have not evolved. There are some things that I wrote when I was a teenager, and I read them now, and yeah, the The handwriting is childish still. A whole bunch of things, but some of the things stylistically and approach to thinking and how I look and analyze a problem are exactly the same. And that's a little bit frightening to realize that in some very profound ways, I have not changed at all. That creeps me out sometimes because I at least always think that I'm improving, that I'm growing. And it's sort of remarkable to realize that there are such large chunks of my psyche and my personality that are truly immutable, or at least the evidence so far of rereading stuff that I wrote when I was 13, and here I am, an old man of 50, and I'm like, shit. In 37 years, I didn't change a hell of a lot, if at all. You know, that's a little bit unnerving.
Not too many years ago. I honestly don't know how many years ago, but I still remember this. I was going through my normal, every few months I clean out all of the old, like paper matter that I have accumulated that aren't just like bills or whatnot. And I found this old notebook in the basement that I was looking through, and I had a list of some of the books that I was reading at the time. Or stuff that you start reading when you're kind of starting to pay attention to literature. So it had things like, Stoker's Dracula, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, books like that. And I remember I had like little notes. It was like, I think it was a list of books that I think I should read and that I was reading. And I remember I had notes on certain books that I did read. And I was looking at them like, yeah, I still think that's true about those books. And then there were books that were crossed out. I was like, have no interest in reading that whatsoever. And I was looking through them like, yeah, that's true. I would still never read these books. So I think that's still pretty consistent. I must admit. There are a couple of times and I was like, oh, okay, yeah, that book should have been given an extra chance. But yeah, I was starting to get set in my ways. I know there were certain types of books that I wanted to read and certain types of books that I was not going to really get started on. Like Jane Austen still eludes me to this day. I will not go about reading her, even though I'm recommended many times that I should. But the little me didn't want to read her, and the older me still isn't making an effort.
Well, I like the movies they made from her books, but I don't like her books, to tell you the truth. That's basically my approach to Jane Austen. I think that Sense and Sensibility, the Joe Wright one, is just a terrific book. Although Keira Knightley is a little too pretty for the role, but it would have been nicer if they'd found an actress who was not so pretty, a little bit more plain, and yet as magnetic. I'm thinking of like Renee Zellweger. Renee Zellweger in the Bridget Jones Diaries is basically basically the same plot, and there's something about her plainness and cheekiness that you say, oh yeah, she would make a perfect Elizabeth Bennet. I actually think that the Bridget Jones Diaries is remarkably well cast and well made picture. I mean, surprisingly, because on paper it doesn't seem like it's going to be a very good movie. The subsequent iterations, they were just money grabs. I don't care about them, but that one I was surprised. But about Jane Austen, yeah, it's Diaries. I'm going from Jane Austen. I'm thinking of the epistolary novels, even though I don't believe that she ever wrote an epistolary novel. But I'm thinking of like from letter writing and diaries and how we portray ourselves on paper, in letters, because when we're writing a letter or an email, we're trying to come across a certain way. And when we're writing a diary, we're also trying to come across as a certain way. But who's the audience for the diary is my wonder,
Well, you're going somewhere that I was literally just planning on going because the Jane Austen comment reminded me of it, and the books I was referencing reminded me of it. That there is a little trick that you can play with novels or literature. In fact, some of the earliest novels in English and in the West were epistolary novels.
Right.
You can give the impression that it's just a collection of letters and novels. Letters and journals built together to tell a story. It was like, it's the equivalent of found footage literature, right?
Yeah.
Effectively, that's what it is. And what's interesting to me is, even though we say these things about, it's on, these devices are unstructured, or the journals are, it's like, it's a little bit too precious. I've noticed that in certain types of literature, the diary, the fake letters give an impression of immediacy and kind of like thrilling adventure that you wouldn't necessarily get from the pure,
Yeah.
novel writing we think of today. And I'm thinking of Frankenstein and Dracula. Actually, the fact that the two earliest horror novels in English,
Yeah, but there's
and
something else.
they're both epistolary,
Yeah.
and they both use that to their advantage, and it adds to in both instances, the creepiness and the uncertainty of what's going on. It's a game,
Yeah,
of
but
course.
there's something else
Work.
going on there. That the epistolary novels were written in a period of time where there weren't other media. There was no cinema. There was no TV, right? And so yeah, you're identifying them with sort of like a more visceral impact kind of thing. And also many of the classic novels of English literature, like Clarissa, for instance, are epistolary novels, and they are landmarks because of whatever, because it was the first novel, or this or that, a bestseller at the time, or what have you. And so you study them. But what happens is that, see, it seems to me that after Madame Bovary, the novel stopped being interested in presenting and creating visceral emotions, or let me rephrase that: serious novels and serious readers of literature were not expected to go for the baser and more salacious emotions that pulp fiction or cinema or television would go for. See, and that coincided with the fading of the epistolary novel as a device, because I mean nobody writes epistolary. I mean there aren't any famous epistolary novels starting with 1900. I mean I can't think of any offhand. There are a number of famous diaries after 1900 that have that same feeling, like the Diaries of Anne Nin, for instance. But as a novel, as a serious novel, I don't think that there are any. You know what I mean?
Well, they come back, but it comes back in the postmodern times. I'm thinking particularly of a book like House of
Yeah,
Leaves,
House of Leaves. Yeah,
which is
that's
very much like going
found
back to that
footage.
old
Yeah,
style.
yeah, found footage literature. That's a good way to say it. But also, it seems that, well, it's very clear to me that literature became highfalutin, and the highfalutin classes didn't want there to be ugly emotions. They wanted the Flaubertian kind of like aesthetic object, and something that you could talk about at your bourgeois little book club, as opposed to something that would be visceral. And so that's why, for instance, I was always so excited by James Elroy, because he was a pulp novelist who was, in terms of craft and talent, had what it took to be a serious novel. And American Tabloid, I would argue, is an extraordinarily good novel, serious novel, highfalutin novel. And it has complete visceral impact. I haven't read L.A. Confidential or Black Delilah, but I know that they're up there. But going back to what you were saying, that the letters and diaries have a visceral impact. But you're thinking only in terms of literature. I mean, when they're being faked, right?
No, not necessarily. I mean, you read Samuel Pepys' account of the fire in London, you really get a visceral experience,
Yeah.
or
Okay.
or surviving the plague. I think it was the plague, or some version of it.
Yeah.
And Andre Gide, you get different kinds of focus areas, or you certainly get it. So they still can exist, and it depends on the degree to which, and that's what happened, I guess, after you get it more in the 20th century and beyond. You get guys who are knowingly trying to write their diaries in a way that are consumable,
Yeah.
right? So there is the distinction between the literary exercise and the personal documentation is intentionally blurring, right? And I think that's coming fully aware in the context. I know you say, like, oh well, post Madame Bovary, they just want this art object devoid of emotion. I don't know that it's necessarily devoid of emotion. I think they just got used to the technique of just being able to inhabit this fictional person's mind, be it either from an omniscient narrator or from the person itself. And I think what you have is the diarists later on are just trying to recreate that or impose it on their reality.
Mm. I'm not sure I understand your argument there.
Well, the point you're saying, like, oh, it's just they don't like raw emotion, and so after Madame Bovary, and they created these pure art objects, and epistles don't do it, or the diaries don't do it. I just think that's wrong. I think they did like emotion after that. That the emotion was just simply created by virtue of inhabiting the mind of a character through these omniscient narrators, or in some cases, the first person narrative. And what happened later on for those diaries afterward, they did still inhabit the emotions and everything. They just put more literary technique into it.
But I think the literary technique sort of like smothered the emotion. I mean, I think that that's the whole point of 20th century, serious 20th century literature and 21st century literature, that they smothered, they smothered what was valuable about novels, the emotion, the emotionality, in technique, in aesthetics. I think that that's the fundamental problem. I mean, a novel like Anna Karenina would never be published today. It's as simple as that. Apart from its length, the subject matter, and the whole notion, it would not be considered serious literature. It would be considered, I don't know what it would be considered, but it would not be considered serious literature. And I think that also because of it's not so neatly packaged as in any kind of genre, I don't think it would find a publisher, to tell you the truth. I do not think that Anna Karenina would be published today anywhere by any publisher.
Well, I guess I'm confused. I don't know what these books you're referring to that are without emotion are. I can't really think of one offhand, other than perhaps some of these esoteric, experimental,
no, I'm talking about like people like Updike, for instance. I never.
Updike is loaded with emotion. I'm sorry, that's just wrong.
It just didn't seem to me. The older I get, the more ersatz I find the things that he wrote about. It's like the illusion of emotion, but not actual emotion. I don't know. This isn't part of the conversation that I wanted to, or this isn't a topic I wanted to go into in this conversation. But I guess it's something I've been thinking about a long time over the last few years, as I've gotten older, as I've firmly crossed into middle-agedom, and I'm starting to look back on a lot of the books that I read as a young man that purported to be about being middle-aged, and I find them like they were like they pretended. How can I put this? It's kind of weird, but the professional writers that I respected growing up, and it's something that I've been thinking about for a while. They pretended to emotion, but they were faking it in a weird way. My thoughts are uncollected at this time on this particular topic, but it's sort of like so now is not the where I can give you like a thought out thesis on these issues. But it's been my sense that, and it's been a growing suspicion as of late, triggered, as a matter of fact, by our discussion of the great white narcissists, that I've started to rethink a lot of these writers and flip through some of the books that I read that I admired at the time that I read them when I was young. And I thought that they were accurate representations of being middle-aged and the emotionality of the times and what have you. And now I'm realizing, as a man firmly who is middle-aged, I'm starting to think that it's fictionalized emotions, okay? Not real emotion. And I'm looking towards the classics. Like right now I'm rereading The Brothers Karamazov, and I'm finding it a lot more real than these contemporary writers that I read. And that, how can I put it? These contemporary writers that I thought were, very accurate, I find them ersatz. And whereas when I was young and read Brothers Karamazov, I thought that it was over the top in a lot of aspects. But now reading it, I'm like, oh no, he was on the money. And so it's a reappraisal of a lot of the literature that I read when I was in my teens and 20s. Okay, and a lot of it, and that was the period of my life when I read the bulk of the books of my life, right? Because I was reading gobbling books, 2, 3, 4 a week, and now rereading them, I'm coming to a different evaluation. But like I said, at this time in our conversation, you and I here now, I'm just not prepared to give a fully thought out and measured argument. But I mean, you see what I'm saying? And I think that this
for the
ties
sake
back
of not losing a potential episode, I will just say we can pause on that.
But actually, it flips back to the issue of diaries. And I wish I had a diary of when I was reading these books when I was a kid, and written down my impressions of them at the time, because I'd like to reread those impressions in light of the impressions I currently have of this work. And I think that that's the value of a diary. of a journal, rather, not a diary. Diary being if you're just laying down facts, and a journal being more of your thoughts. And by the way, I'm making this distinction just arbitrarily, just to make it easy to talk about one and the other. I think that journals are useful. Personal journals are useful to track your evolution, to track how you've changed, to write down what you thought at that time, so that years later you can look at that and say, I still think the same, or no, that was totally wrong. You know what I mean?
So you're actually getting to something I wanted to pose, and I think I'd like to pose to the audience, or if you will, which is, would you or would you not recommend to keep a journal? I think you basically said yes for the things you mentioned.
Yeah.
I'll go very specific as to what I think in what context might they be useful. I think rather than just, here's what I'm feeling today, I think it has to be with regard to something.
Yeah.
One of the projects I've always thought of whenever I start a new book is, I think to myself, let's say, for example, I'll pick up, pick a book, whatever it is. Let's just go back to what I referenced earlier. Let's say I was starting Frankenstein from scratch.
Mm-hmm.
I think, it's maybe worthwhile as you're reading it to keep a diary of, or a journal of, okay, you read through page whatever, write down your impressions of the book and what was going on, and then have your compendium, like, I don't know how many pages you have with the book, and then keep it with the book, and then you can see how you evolved. I think that's one exercise that I actually would recommend.
Yes, I definitely would recommend that. And I regret that I did not do it. Yeah.
Yeah, the other version I thought of, and I might do this for the next election cycle, is event related, which is, in retrospect, I think I would have liked to have kept a journal of the 2016 presidential campaign.
Mm-hmm.
Just it doesn't have to be every single day, but like key event, impressions of what was going on in my assessment, because I remember a lot of it.
Sure.
But I know I don't remember everything. And that's one of the things where I actually would be interested in going back to know what I thought about it. And to me, I think that would be a wonderful, because, if you think back, what is the record of this election going to be? It will invariably be Twitter brain farts, various bad news articles written by mainstream media, occasionally interesting essays published throughout the time. But I think you're not going to see too many very personally, just privately thought out reflections on what people were thinking at the time. I think it's a little bit too public, what people write about on these things. I think sometimes that, those public articles are worth it. But I think it's also would have been very interesting to just private, no one's around to really know what I think one way or the other, just lay out the thoughts as they're occurring to you. I think that would have been an interesting exercise.
Yeah. Be it politics or literature, laying down what you think about something specific, because laying down how you're feeling or your mood, that is just so ridiculous, because you're basically, how could I put it? If you think of writing as scaffolding, when you write something about an event or a book, well, it's objective. It's there. It's fixed in the world, or as fixed as anything can be, really. But like a book's text doesn't change in 20 years. It's still going to be the same damn book, right? It's you who changed. And so writing something about a book or a political event, yeah, sure, that's good. Writing about your mood, well, your mood is changeable by definition. And so it's building a scaffolding around a tower of jello. You know what I'm saying? It's pointless and stupid and embarrassing. That's what's happened to me. That a lot of the things I wrote when I was a kid, I found them deeply embarrassing, because they were about, how I was feeling. And the funny thing is that at the time I was feeling some of the stuff and I was writing them and what have you, I remember that I was sort of like either gilding the lily or sort of like, cheered up by the fact that I was writing this and it was coming out really well, And so it was a weird, it was a lie. It was just, I was just, writing down a thought or an impression or a mood or what have you, that was just based on something so transitory and ephemeral that it was perfectly worthless, right? But writing
I didn't eat breakfast today, and now I'm irritable. Here's my reflections on irritability. It's like,
and my life is filled with ennui, and I'm ready to commit suicide. But let me write for a few hours here about how my life should be over, and it's just stupid. It's just it's just adolescent bullshit. But going back to it. I wish I'd written down what I thought at the time of some of these books, because also there's something else I realized that at the time, my impression would have been much more forthright and true, because when I was writing about these, when I was reading these authors, rather, I didn't have a clear idea of exactly their reputations. And I think that my later getting hip to their reputations would have colored my actual impressions of reading the book. Okay, and I think that that's important. That the visceral experience of reading something at the time contrasted to what you remember that visceral experience, especially as it is colored by the opinions of other people. Because I've talked to countless people, well, not countless people, but many people, about the great white narcissist over the years. I've talked to different people about Joyce Carol Oates and Updike and Bellow and what have you at different points in my life. But the point is, see, each of those conversations, these different people gave me certain insights that I hadn't had before, and those insights, collapsed into my original insights and ideas and thoughts and feelings about a particular work of theirs. And so, over the years, it's changed and mutated. You see what I'm saying?
Well, one of the things I'm trying to recreate is like a little experience I have. You can actually get it in some books, but I had this experience reading a book of history about a piece of Poland's history, for example, and in the margins, because it was a previously owned book,
Yeah.
one guy who had read the book prior to me was writing detailed notes of why he thought this historian was full of shit and why.
Ah.
And you created this. What you effectively created was, I think the phenomenon is called a palimpsest,
Yeah.
which is different layers of text on the same page. And what you are getting is the underlying text, but also commentary around it. So you transform your reading experience into something completely different. I want to recreate that with my own thoughts on the book, because what I want to do in encountering a book again is I'd like to encounter, in addition to that book, my original self reading it, and then I can make a judgment call on it. Artists have actually tried to reproduce this in fiction itself. Very famously, Nabokov did it in Pale Fire, which, for those of you who've read it, would know. It's a 1,000-line poem, or at least a 999-line poem, and then the rest of the book is commentary on that. And you realize from reading the commentary that it's someone integral to the author who wrote the poem. And not only is he interpreting the poem, he's giving you his impressions of said author and what he did to said author without spoiling it. It's actually a very interesting and riveting story.
Yeah, it is riveting. Yeah, yeah. It's a great achievement in 20th century literature, I would say. I would definitely say that Pale Fire is up there. But anyway, the thing that goes back to the whole notion of journals and diaries is that we change, and that's the thing. I mean, it's sort of like we're changing, and we can't get an objective sense of how we have changed. I myself think that I'm exactly the same as I was when I was, 15, 13, even younger, right? And I look at pictures of myself when I was that age and I am now, and of course I'm radically different. But I don't have any, direct access to that child that I used to be, and and it's something I deeply regret, that because I don't have access to the guy I was when I was 20, when I was 30, when I was even 40. I have subsumed those men. Those men are, a part of me, like one of those, what do they call them? The little Russian dolls, the nested
Matrushka dolls.
Matrushka dolls, right? That's basically it. It's like, one layer covers up all the other layers that have happened, and it's a little bit. It's depressing because you forget who you used to be, and when you look at the diaries of what you'd done back in the past, you sort of like get a glimpse of who you used to be. And the man you are now is in many ways lesser than he was, and in many ways greater. Greater in age and in time on the earth, but lesser in terms of, say, energy or whatever facet you want to, whatever quality you want to quantify or measure somehow, right? And it would be great to be able to look back on that guy. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I've lost a few important pieces so that of my past that I regret doing so, and I look back on them somewhat as a shell. And I'll tell you why. Because I was the valedictorian of my high school, I can go back and visit my high school, and my name will still be up on a banner somewhere. My picture may be on a hallway somewhere,
Hmm.
and I've lost a lot of key details. Like I didn't keep any of my essays. I gave my valedictory speech, and I've forgotten like 90% of it, and I didn't keep it. And from what I gather, people were very fond of that speech. I remember just vague notions of why they probably were, but it's a vague notion and a vague memory. I don't really remember much about it other than I was forced to edit it because I had a line. And this is the only thing I remember from it, that to the effect of, this piece of paper isn't as interesting as the fact that you achieved it. And I was told I had to remove that because for a number of people, that piece of paper is all they're ever going to get.
Mm.
I thought, wow, that's a damn violent thing to say
Yeah.
about the graduates. And I wanted to go back and read, well, what the hell was I getting to there? And I didn't keep it. I really regret it. And I know there's a lot of pieces like that. And I have the shell of clearly I did something, but I wish I could remember things beyond my initial impression, because I'm sure, or not my initial impression, but my current impression, because I know that my current impression is based on limited memory and what people were telling me at the time.
Yeah, and what
so,
happens also is that your limited impressions of what happened, they're going to become more and more limited over time, because you're going to start to focus on smaller and smaller details of that entire event, just because the rest of your life, the memories of the rest of your life start crowding out that stuff from your past. You know,
mhm.
it's deeply sad that you're losing out on who you used to be. And that, I guess, is the great value of keeping a journal, of like writing down, oh, this big thing happened, and writing it down, and writing the specifics of it, and writing it in as much detail as possible. But it's so damn hard to do it on a daily basis. And what also happens is, a lot of times, um, some things that happen to you at the time don't seem that important. It's only retrospectively that they're a big deal. Or perhaps it would be more appropriate to say it's in retrospect, or as time goes on, you start to ignore all the other details except those little incidents that happen, that you turn into a narrative as to why your life is as the way it is. And you focus on that specific detail. But when it happened, it was just one more detail about you, amid the flood of other details happening to you. If you had a
What would you
diary, you'd be able
say
to
to
say, what?
what would you say to someone who would, because I can already hear the criticism saying this is narcissistic navel gazing, it's a waste of time, why would you bother, what do you care about who you were in the past?
Why do I care about who I was in the past?
Yeah, what would you say to said person? I have an answer, but I want to know what you would say.
Well, okay, that's interesting, because on the one hand, there's kind of right. Who you were in the past, in a very real sense, doesn't happen to who you are today. It's who you are today. You are a different person than the one you were in the past. So who cares, really? And it's the one who's doing things now that matters, because the past is gone, right? You can't change it. So in one sense, he's accurate. The person who says, "Oh, who cares about who you were back in the past?" On the other hand, knowing who you were in the past and understanding the motivations and what was driving you in the past, which a lot of times you forget, hard as that may seem to believe, but the motivations you had back in the past, they become obscure or forgotten. And sometimes those motivations are what made you today.
Yep.
And it's important to know those motivations so you can figure out, oh, it was because of this that I am who I am today. And the fact of the matter is, I've thought long and hard about my own life. And I'm fortunate to know exactly why I am the way I am today, and why I'm living the way I'm living today, and the circumstances of my life today. And some of that is a bit bitter, I'm not going to lie. Some of it is, I wish I'd made better choices when I was younger. And some of the motivations that pushed me forward were stupid, And sometimes the motivations were stupid, even though the result was actually terrific. Okay. You know how that can happen, where you have a lousy motivation or an immature, childish motivation, but the result is truly valuable. And that is something I find rather surprising as I get older. And ultimately, the man I am today is the product of the decisions of the man I used to be. So it's smart, or not the man I used to be, or rather the various men that I was in the past, to follow up on that Matrushka metaphor. So it's smart of me, it pays me to know what the motivation of those men that I used to be in the past was, so that I can figure out what I'm doing now and why I am in the hole that I am today. I'm not talking about my own personal circumstances, I'm just talking in general. So that I can understand the hole that I'm in and perhaps see a path out of this hole and onto a higher plane.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with that. I'll phrase it a little differently. To me, it's a microcosm of the broader question, which is why bother with history at all?
Oh, yeah.
Right. So at the individual level, right, this is what we're talking about, which is you have your past, and the son is the father of the man, is the cliche you use, but it's true. And when I study my own past, I would realize, well, how I got here. Did I make the right decisions, make wrong decisions? Did I learn from the past? Did I build on it? There's a relationship there that can't really be denied. And if I play the game of, oh, why bother? Why think about it? It's a waste of time. More or less reproducing at the personal level the broader point of, history is history, man. It's a waste. The ever present is the ever present dominion over the entirety of the world. The past sucks. We're always improving, or if we're not improving, this is by virtue of being present superior to that. Why ever give it consideration? And I just fundamentally refuse to do that. If I'm not going to forget the past of my country, society, civilization as a whole, why the fuck am I going to play the game of, oh, my own past is inconsequential? My own past is one of the little teeny slivers that ultimately builds up the whole fucking edifice.
Yeah. No, I completely agree that to discard the past, I mean, you discard the past at your peril, because then you'll be doomed to repeat it. And I can say about my own case, knowing my past history, I'm able to see certain flaws in my character that have repeated themselves over the years, and which today I am very careful not to repeat. Certain attitudes, certain behaviors that I carried out for reasons that at the time made sense, or that were, understandable. Because some of these flaws or character failings are not so much inherent as expressions of forces and pressures that came to bear on me, and that were just the natural reactions to those accidents that befell me, and led to certain attitudes and certain behaviors that are negative, but they're understandable where they came from. I don't want I think I'm sounding incredibly abstract, but I don't want to get into the specifics, because it would, first of all, it's personal, and secondly, it would bog down the conversation. But those flaws that I have, by knowing my past and knowing how these flaws have affected my past, I'm able to gauge the present and avoid those same mistakes. And maybe I'm making other mistakes, bigger mistakes perhaps, but I'm not making the same mistakes. And I figure that it's fine to make a mistake, but you shouldn't be making the same mistake if you've already identified it.
Right. I mean, it's the entire foundation of empiricism, right?
Yeah.
Think about it. I mean, what is empiricism other than experiential fact, accumulated, documented, drives our understanding going forward?
Yeah.
What the fuck do you think that is, other than, past events, your personal events, your historic events, your experimental events? They're all the same fucking thing at the end of the day.
Thing is, see, if we consider ourselves children of the liberal democracies, and I think that Benway, you and I both would consider ourselves as such, even though we're not particularly that happy with our legacy. But if we are children of the liberal democracies, of the Enlightenment democracies, well, there were two pillars to it. There was empiricism and pragmatism. Pragmatism of knowing how people really were, as opposed to having an idealized version of it. And in that pragmatism, you have to look at how things really are, and sometimes it's quite painful to look at how things really are. But it's necessary. It's in order to understand where we are and figure out if we are going to achieve the things that we want to achieve, if we're going to get to the spot where we want to get to. You see what I'm saying? So yeah, I think it's a enlightened liberal democratic spirit. This empiricism, this pragmatism.
And it's actually a competing tendency with another element that still exists within liberal democracies. It's tied to this whole notion of whether or not you think experience matters or something else matters. I mean, one of the fundamentals of idealism, which is still part of liberal democracy, particularly its German flavor, but let's just say idealism. Part of one of the variations you get out of that is there's such thing as what's the phrase I'm looking for? You have your experiential knowledge, but then you have knowledge you can get just simply by virtue of thinking about it. You think, the logic of the thought makes it true. A priori.
Yeah, a priori. Yeah.
So what's interesting about that is, and that's part of what makes idealism of liberal democracies and this rejection of the past work, is this notion that, fuck empiricism. At the end of the day, we just logically can detect, regardless of experience, what the true principles of the reality are, and we proceed to them. German idealism fundamentally is built on this.
But it ultimately led to the Third Reich.
Well, it resulted in Marxism first.
Well, yeah,
Marxism is fundamentally built on it, but also in the liberal democratic principles. If you really think about progressivism, it's like, everybody's about, all of these antiquated, arbitrary ways that people think about things needs to be fixed by either being torn asunder or being fixed through re-education.
Right.
And it's funny because you're re-educating accumulated experience, accumulated history, accumulated knowledge. Can you argue that said knowledge is imperfect? Sure, you probably can. Would you say that you're going to throw out the whole fucking thing with the dishwater? Well, or with the bathwater? Yeah, people tried that, and it usually leads to fucking disasters. But it's still with us. That idea that you can just create things out of context is still a fundamental driver in a lot of what we do. And I think even though we started talking about diaries and the importance of thinking back on your past self, I still think that mentality, that a priori knowledge mentality, can easily be led in such ways to say, fuck that shit. Don't even think about that shit. It's the future. It's the idealistic ideal form that's what matters. Fuck your life. Fuck everything about you in your past. That may be a stretch on my part, but I think the link is there.
Well, a little bit of a stretch, but there is something there to it. And ultimately, you start to think to yourself and realize that idealism is the trope of the immature, inexperienced man. It's not the trope of somebody who's been around, because anybody who's been around finds it laughable. The whole notion that you can, a priori deduce everything true in the world is just ridiculous to somebody who's been around the world. There's an amusing saying, in theory and practice, there is no difference. In theory, there is no difference between theory and practice. In practice, there is. The empirical knowledge teaches you things that you can never gain from theory, that you can never gain from a priori dissection of the problem, no matter how clever you are. Because the world is a lot more surprising than what can be invented by the mind of a man. It's as simple as that. You can be the cleverest individual on the face of this earth, but miss out on things that reality will throw at you. You can know everything about the world and get hit by an asteroid. It's as simple as that. You see what I'm saying? The asteroid will trump your knowledge. It seems to me that that the problem that we have in a contemporary society, contemporary liberal democracies, is that it prioritizes the young. It's always looking for the novel. And so it shoves aside those who are older because it says that the old, out with the old, in with the new kind of thing. But the problem is that the new, they view the world from an a priori perspective. and they don't understand it. They don't have the knowledge. They don't have the scars or the mileage to understand the world. And so,
I also think the lack of, if we persist in a lack of documentation,
yeah.
broadly speaking, it just makes it easier for that mentality to keep going. It's like, oh, what do you mean you guys had the better thoughts? And what was, show me, prove to me that it was true. I mean, if we don't document why we why we got to where we got, it's easier to forget it
Well, I
all. And
remember the
even
bull sessions I had when I was in college as a kid, and compared to the bull sessions I have now. I mean, at least now I have the weight of actual experience. I know what the fuck I'm talking about. When I was a kid, I didn't know shit. I didn't know anything. I was a fool because I was young, because I hadn't been around in the world, and no matter how clever, I couldn't figure out the world just by sitting in some dorm room, smoking a joint, and shooting the shit with some equally immature moron. Yeah, it didn't matter if we both had gotten 1600 on the SATs. We're still stupid. We're still morons. We still didn't know shit from Shinola, because we're young. But our society teaches us to glorify the young, to appreciate only the young and the new. And those who know are discarded. It's bizarre. It's almost as if they are discarded because they know, because they have come to some hard conclusions. It's because of this knowledge, almost, that they're discarded by our contemporary society. Yeah? I mean, to an outside observer, it would seem so. I mean, there are other pressures obviously going on, but it would seem so, as if our society is scared of true knowledge, of empirically arrived at knowledge arrived at through bitter experience. Because we keep
of course
electing
they are
these.
frustrated with that, because they fundamentally approve of a system that accepts tabula rasa
Yeah.
on almost everything. The fact that you have the accumulated experience invariably means that accumulated experience led to a judgment, and a judgment determined that certain paths either don't exist or will lead you down to a destructive element. So, in other words, a solution that you could potentially come up with is off the table because you already, figured out you couldn't do that. And this mentality of hating past experience fucking permeates everything. It's not just young kids. It goes to business. I can't tell you how many times I hear business executives say, like, because it didn't work in the past is not an answer for us. And I know on some level there's some way you can paint that as say, oh yeah, we shouldn't be limited by past choices. And yeah, I get that sometimes past choices were as good as it could get. And, sometimes a better solution comes. But it's interpreted to mean like, oh, you know what? Just because we thought profitability was important in the past doesn't mean it is in the future. It's like, that's a fucking asinine thing to conclude. But people reach said conclusions. I mean, This is how much it permeates. And this is why, little details like keeping little documentation of how you evolved your thought actually does almost like the little butterfly flapping of wings creating hurricanes down the line actually kind of does make sense.
Yeah, it does. And so I think that it is important, and it's essential to be doing diaries because we keep track of who we used to be. Yeah. Yeah, I keep going back to the Matryoshka model of that metaphor is just so appropriate because in the Matryoshka, in the little Russian nesting dolls, right? There's a big doll, and you unscrew the top half of it, right? And you open it, and there's a slightly smaller doll, right? And you go through the line, and there are 7, 8, and there are a whole bunch until. And by the way, if you've never seen one, on the outside, it's this old woman, traditionally. Sometimes for novelty, they'll do it with different actual people or what have you. But traditionally, it's an old woman. And as you unscrew the top and go to the smaller and smaller dolls, the woman grows progressively younger until it's finally just a little baby, right? And it's a very small piece of wood of roughly, about an inch long, roughly. And that little baby, it's painted, hand-painted. They're very beautiful. Now, the thing is, see, in the Matryoshka doll, they are defined. You unscrew all the dolls and you have 7 or 8 or 10 iterations or however many dolls, right? But in a man, it's not delineated. They're not discrete. It's all mixed up and mashed together. You grow over the man you used to be. And you incorporated him, but not like this neat little doll nested within the other. It's just this mass, this porous mass. And sometimes what is facing out into the world goes all the way back to when you were a child, right? That's the thing that I found shocking when I read some of the stuff I'd written when I was 13, 14, that some of the mentality and ways of thinking were exactly the same. I hadn't changed in over 35 years. That was truly shocking, right? And that's how it is with people. That some parts of you changed quite a bit, and some parts of you changed not at all. And I think that's why journals, it's hard to maintain the discipline. Ultimately, that's my problem. I find it hard to keep up the discipline because it's not like work. Because when I do work, there's something to show for it. And I complete it because it's a work product, right? But when it's just a journal, there's no due date, There's nobody expecting it. And so I wind up saying, oh, I'll do it later and wind up not doing it at all. But now I really regret it. I really regret it because I wish I knew what I was thinking at certain key moments of my life. You know what I mean? And that knowledge is, it's a fiction of my memory. It's not something on a page that I can read, and I wish I had that.
Well, I think that's the interesting exit question to leave for the audience, which is I'm actually legitimately curious if the audience does document anything, and if they do, what is their preferred method?
Yeah.
And how successful are you?
Yeah.
I suspect a lot of us aren't, but some of us might do it. Maybe even if it's something as simple as like I reading into a tape recorder for 5 minutes every night, or whatever your preferred method is. It's still going to produce something.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll leave it up to we will both. I think, Doctor, you agree with this. Leave it up to our audience. If you've gotten this far on the podcast, why don't you put down in the comments your preferred method of note-taking of diaries and journals or what have you. Write it down and let's tell us what you think about this particular subject because it's kind of interesting. And I'm sure that a lot of people go into detail because I bet a lot of people have very interesting methods of writing down their diaries. And it would be great to hear about those methods. Yeah, like Kavanaugh. Kavanaugh's, Judge Kavanaugh, Justice Kavanaugh now, who had his little, that calendar where he wrote down all the things.
Calendar of how many days he never got laid.
Yeah, basically, yeah. I thought that was really interesting. Yeah. Okay, so on that cheerful note, we will bid you a fond farewell. This has been the Coach and Benway podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and we will catch you next time.
Adios.